Welcome to Football's Golden Oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster, part 3 of the Brian Clough story. Story from 2016 at the Globe Arena, Morecambe. The big summer signing though was Asa Hartford, bought from Manchester City for £500,000 to fill the hole left by Gemmell, and Clough compared him to Tony Curry at Leeds, Liam Brady at Arsenal and Graham Souness at Liverpool. Asa played only 3 times in a Forest career, all won, before he was offloaded to Everton for £400,000 on the grounds that his style didn't suit the club. Taylor saying, "Hartford's passing, although accurate, is too short." Forest needed a player who could switch the ball rapidly from left to right as defences were beginning to read John Robertson, and they wanted to exploit the forward surges of Viv Anderson. Taylor said, "We made a mistake. You can call it bad management or good management, getting rid of Asa so quickly, but I prefer to call it good management." Whatever the reason, Hartford was Taylor's first real mistake at Forest, and perhaps a sign that the magic was beginning to fade. I met Asa in 2016 at the Globe Arena, Morecambe, when he was a scout, and what an absolutely delightful man he was, being happy to talk. When I asked him what went wrong at Nottingham Forest, he did say he was glad to escape the rule of fear that dominated at Forest, even when the players were relaxing round the lunch table. Players were petrified of seeing anything that might upset Brian, but of course my research shows that there was no rule of fear. In fact, quite the opposite. The players loved Brian Clough. "1980, the dream continues. Forest declined to play in the home and away 1979 Intercontinental Cup against Paraguay's Club Olympia, most likely because Brian didn't like South Americans, like Alf Ramsey. In the 1979 European Super Cup, Forest beat Barcelona 2-1 on aggregate in January and February 1980, with loanee Charlie George scoring the only goal in the home leg. Forest reached the final of the Football League Cup for a 3rd successive time, but they missed numerous chances and lost 1-0 to Wolves. In the European Cup quarter-final, Forest won 3-1 at Dynamo Berlin to overturn a 1-0 home defeat and then beat Ajax 2-1 on aggregate in the semi-final. Another European Cup final, and Forest met Hamburg at Madrid's Santiago Bernabeu Stadium, where John Robertson proved to be the match winner, converting a final pass from Gary Birtles. Robertson, you can see him standing far right on the photograph. What surrounded the final? Taylor predicted a 1-0 win, with Clough and Taylor both having their insurance £1,000 bet on Hamburg against their £5,000 bonus. In the tunnel before the kick-off, Lloyd was standing next to Kevin Keegan, with whom he had played at Liverpool, saying that Kenny Baines would mark him and was going to kick the shit out of him. Keegan glanced up to see Burns removing his teeth, showing him chewing some red gum that looked like a piece of steak, and Kenny thought Keegan was unnerved by the incident. Lloyd wrote later, "Although Keegan began the game in his usual position up front, after 4 horrendous tackles from Kenny and a couple from me, it wasn't long before he moved." Victories are often spoken of as being the platform for greater things, the heralds of a new age. They rarely are. More often triumph comes not as a beginning, but as the end of an era, and that was certainly how it was for Forest, as they became the first side to win the European Cup more often than they had won their domestic league. After that night in Madrid, it was never so good again, not for the club, and certainly not for Clough. Maybe alcohol was ruling and ruining his life. In the weeks leading up to the final, Clough had been acting increasingly erratically. He insisted the team should return to their hotel 25 miles outside of Madrid rather than meet with their wives. it was a weirdly unsatisfactory end to Forest's period of greatness. Be kind to everyone on the way up, you'll meet the same people on the way down, and that was what Harry Storer said. In the 1980-81 European Cup first round, Forest lost 2-0 on aggregate, losing 1-0 at home and away to CSKA Sofia, and McGovern said the double defeat affected the team's self-confidence in that they had lost to a modestly talented opponent. They lost the 1980 European Super Cup on away goals after a 2-2 aggregate draw against Valencia, with Ian Boyer scoring both goals in the home first leg. On February 11, 1981, Forest lost 1-0 in the 1980 Intercontinental Cup against Uruguayan side Club Nacional de Football, played for the first time at a neutral venue, the National Stadium in Tokyo, in front of 62,000 fans. The League and European Cup winning squad was brought up to capitalise on player sale value, something that both Clough and Taylor later said was a huge mistake. The rebuilt side, comprising youngsters and signings such as Ian Wallace, Raimondo Ponte and Justin Fashanu, did not challenge for trophies. Taylor said in 1982, "For many weeks now I don't believe I've been doing justice to Forest, so after a great deal of thought I decided to take early retirement." Trainer Jimmy Gordon also retired. The death of a friendship. Pale and drawn, Peter Taylor walked into Clough's office in May 1982 after a 1-0 home defeat by Man United, locked the door, slumped in a chair and said, "I've shot it, I'm resigning." So ended the most famous and successful partnership in the history of football, a 17-year association which began under the leaking rafters of Hartlepool and climaxed under the floodlights at the Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid, was severed in the time it takes to utter 7 words. Clough tried to dissuade his mate, but he failed to recognise that they were no longer mates. They hadn't been for a long time, and it's impossible to know whose version of the truth to believe, as they both differed markedly. Taylor said, "In my last year at Forest, I lost respect for Brian and realised I had grown to dislike him, and I had time to take stock. I had enough money, a happy family, and all the honours the game could bring. Brian and I weren't happy together. The chemistry, which won us so many titles, wasn't working anymore. Worst of all, we had lost the ability to laugh. I woke up each morning dreading the thought of work. Was it me who changed O'Brien? I just know there were sides to his character I could no longer come to terms with. His need for hangers-on, his craving for publicity irritated me, and he was unable to cope without people running about after him." Following one further attempt to change Taylor's mind before the 82-83 season, Clough broke off all contact, and he was aghast when Taylor took the manager's job at Derby County 18 months later. And the final nail in the coffin was when Taylor signed John Robertson from under Clough's nose. A very sad end to a wonderful partnership. Brian would hit anyone who broke the rules. Anderlecht beat Forest in the 83-84 UEFA Cup semi-finals in controversial circumstances, as several contentious refereeing decisions went against Forest. Over a decade later, it emerged that before the match, the referee Guruseto Muro received a £27,000 loan from Anderlecht's chairman Constant van den Stock. Muro would die in a car crash in 1987. In 1997, UEFA subsequently banned Anderlecht for 1 year from European competitions. This was an unbelievable story which I will read to you all now, proving to me once again that UEFA, as well as FIFA, are a corrupt body. Notts Forest beat Sheffield Wednesday on penalties in the Football League Centenary Tournament final in April 1988 after drawing 0-0 that finished third in the league and reached the FA Cup semi-finals. On January '89, Clough joined the fray of a City Ground pitch invasion by hitting two of his team's own fans who went on the pitch. See photos of the hit at the top and the reconciliation at the bottom. Forest were still competitive. Forest beat Everton 4-3 after extra time in the 1989 Full Members Cup final and came back to beat Luton Town 3-1 in the 1989 Football League Cup final. Frank Clyde said to me when I talked to him at Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, the week before a Wembley final, we turned up for training and Clough said, "Don't get changed, get on the bus. We're going to Scarborough for the day to help Peter Taylor move furniture into his flat." The night before the 1979 League Cup final, Clough organised a crate of champagne as he had noticed we were looking a bit uptight, and this was his way of relaxing us, having a drink and listening to Peter Taylor telling his funny stories. Forest were chasing a unique treble when they met Liverpool in the FA Cup semi-final at Hillsborough, but disaster claimed the lives of 97 Liverpool fans, causing the game to be called off after 6 minutes. Forest lost their rescheduled game 3-1 before finishing third in the league for the second successive year, but were unable to compete in the UEFA Cup as the post-Heysel Stadium disaster ban still had one season to run. Forest beat Oldham Athletic 1-0 to retain the League Cup in 1990, and Clough reached his only FA Cup final against Tottenham Hotspur in 1991. Spurs won 2-1 after extra time, and Roy Keane admitted later that he was not fit to play and played an insignificant role in the game. English clubs were readmitted to Europe for the 1990-91 season, but 1990 League Cup winners Forest were not included, and in the summer of 1991 Teddy Sheringham left Millwall to join Forest for $2 million, a record at the time. A desperately sad end. In 1991-92 Forest beat Southampton 3-2 after extra time in the Full Members Cup final, and then they lost 1-0 to Man United in the 1992 League Cup final, meaning that Nottingham Forest had played in 7 domestic cup finals at Wembley in 5 seasons, winning 5 of them, a great record. Forest finished 8th in the league to earn a place in the new FA Premier League, and on August 16, 1992, Forest beat Liverpool 1-0 at home, Teddy Sheringham scoring in the first ever televised live Premier League game. Only 1 week later, Sheringham was transferred to Spurs for £2.1 million, with the resulting loss of form meaning Brian Clough's 18-year managerial reign ended in May 1993, with Forest being relegated from the Premier League. In the final game of the season, away to Ipswich, Forest lost 2-1, with Nigel Clough, Brian's son, scoring the last goal of the Brian Clough era at Nottingham Forest. Relegation was followed by Roy Keane's £3.75 million transfer to Manchester United. The rift with Taylor. Several events strained their friendship while at Derby. Taylor was riled when Clough accepted a pay rise from Longson at Derby. Taylor didn't get one and wasn't even told. Brian would see the chairman and resign before a cheque would solve the so-called problem, and he would let journalists have an inside story for a stated amount, but Taylor never saw a penny. When Taylor came back as manager of Derby and signed John Robertson without informing Clough on May 21st, 1983, they never spoke again. Clough called Taylor a snake in the grass. Taylor responded, "Clough's outbursts are the sort of thing I have come to expect from the person I now regard with great distaste." The rift had not been repaired when Taylor died in October 1990, but Clough and his family attended Peter's funeral, and according to Peter's daughter Wendy, Brian was deeply upset. Brian dedicated his autobiography in 1994 to Taylor and also paid tribute to him when he was given the freedom of Nottingham, as he also did in September 1999 when a bust was unveiled of Clough at the City Ground. So sad to see a wonderful partnership descend into acrimony. Corruption allegations. Clough was implicated in the 1990s bums scandal in English football, a euphemism for illicit payments to ensure player transfer deals went through. Clough was linked in court in June 1993 by Alan Sugar, then chairman of Tottenham Hotspur, to the transfer of Teddy Sheringham from Forest to Spurs, where Terry Venables told Sugar that Clough liked a bum, so Sugar sanctioned a cash payment of £58,000, which he believed would be paid to an agent, but instead was handed over to Ronnie Fenton, Clough's assistant at Forest. Former Premier League Chief Executive Rick Parry led an investigation into Clough for misconduct, but the case was dropped due to his ill health, and Parry said, "On the balance of evidence, we felt he was guilty of taking bums, as the evidence was pretty strong." Former Forest Chief Scout Alan Hill confirmed Clough had made illegal payments to players and backroom staff in breach of FA rules. Clough also denied the allegations, saying, "Asking me what it's like to make money out of transfers is like asking, what's it like to have cancer? I don't know, I've never had it." Brian's retirement was spent concentrating on his fight against alcoholism, possibly dating back as far as leaving Sunderland, ill health and corruption allegations. Brian's drink problem must have started when he was at Sunderland following his injury and lasted over 30 years, a fact that really blighted his life and his friendship with Taylor, and so sad he didn't follow Jimmy Greaves to Alcoholics Anonymous. The death of Brian Clough. Brian Clough died of stomach cancer on September 20th, 2004 on Ward 30 in Derby City Hospital at the age of 69, having been admitted a few days earlier. Such was his popularity, fans of Derby County and Nottingham Forest, usually fierce rivals, mourned together following his death. A memorial service was held at Derby's Pride Park Stadium on October 21st, 2004, which was attended by more than 40,000 people. Originally it was to have been held at Derby Cathedral, but had to be moved because of the demand for tickets. In August 2005, the stretch of the A52 linking Nottingham and Derby was named Brian Clough Way, and his widow, Barbara, expressed her gratitude to the Nottingham City Council, saying, "Brian would have been amazed, but genuinely appreciative." The photo shows an elderly Brian with the famous green sweater. Sadly, alcohol had won his final battle. Three clubs remembered Clough. His hometown of Middlesbrough unveiled a statue of Brian on May 16, 2007, in the town's Albert Park, through which he usually walked on his way home from Ayresome Park. That's far right. In 2007-8, a redevelopment scheme building new houses on the site of the old Middlesbrough General Hospital named roads after famous former players, including Brian Clough, Wilf Mannion and George Capson. A statue was erected on November 6, 2008 at the junction of King Street and Queen Street in the centre of Nottingham, and unveiled by Barbara Clough in front of a crowd of more than 5,000 people. That's the bottom photograph. The Brian Clough and Peter Taylor Monument was officially unveiled at Pride Park, Derby, in a family service on August 27, 2010, designed by sculptor Andy Edwards who previously produced the Steve Bloomer bust, another fantastic Derby County player, in the stadium, top left. Idiosyncrasies of the great man. Mark Crossley joined Notts Forest in 1987 and broke into the first team in 1990. Mark's hero, Clough, gave him 4 nicknames: Barnsley, Imbecile, I'll let you work out what that one says, and Jigsaw when he got into the first team. Mark asked, "Why Jigsaw, boss?" Clough said, "Because every time the ball comes into the box, you go to bloody pieces, son." When Mark shook hands with the referee, Clough hung him on a hook in the dressing room, but none of this fazed Crossley. The first contract Crossley ever signed with Clough was blank, where all the wages should have been, so Mark said he couldn't sign it. Either you sign it or get back to play for Barnsley, so Mark signed it. It was for £500 a week, and Clough gave him his daughter's car, but then he took the money for it out of Mark's wages to pay for it. Crossley played over 300 games for Forest and is the only goalkeeper to hold a special record. Anybody guess what it is? He saved a Matt Le Tissier penalty. Le Tissier scored 47 out of 48 penalties. Idiosyncrasies continued. Brian was rarely involved in daily training, leaving it to the trainer, but occasionally he would take the team for exercises on the banks of the River Trent, where there was a huge field of sticking nettles that they had to run through. Roy Keane made his debut for Forest at Anfield and had a decent game, a 2-0 defeat, but the next morning he reported for training at the City Ground, met Brian Clough in the dressing room, who asked him, "What's your name, son?" Keane replied, and then Clough took off his shoes, which were muddy, as he had been walking his dog round the pitch. "Give these a clean for me, will you, Roy?" In 1991, Forest played Crystal Palace in an FA Cup replay at home. Were leading 2-1 when Keane passed back to goalkeeper Mark Crossley, but it was intercepted and Palace equalised. Clough walked into the dressing room, punched Keane in the face or chest and said, "Don't ever pass the ball back to the goalkeeper." Keane, laid on the floor, could only nod his head in agreement. Clough generally called Roy Irishman, and once again Keane was such a great admirer of Clough that it never bothered him. Keane always said that many football managers are bluffers, banging on about rolling the sleeves up, having the right attitude, taking some pride in the shirt you're wearing. But Brian Clough dealt in details, facts, specific incidents, which he invariably got right. He was very demanding, but Roy Keane loved it. Brian's thoughts on the men employed by England. Hoddle's achievements as a manager in no way qualified him for the top job. Keegan didn't have what it takes to get the best out of players. Peter Taylor's friends in the media talked up his abilities far beyond what the results would show. I'm amazed to see that Platt is still involved in the England setup, especially after his time at Nottingham Forest. Brian Howard Clough, 1935 to 2004. I can't even spell spaghetti, never mind talk Italian. How could I tell an Italian how to play? This was his response on the influx of foreign players into the English game. You don't want roast beef and Yorkshire pudding every night and twice on Sunday. That was his response to too much football on television. Walk on water. I know most people will say instead of walking on it, I should have taken more of it with my drinks. They are absolutely right. That was his candid reflection on his drink problem. Take your hands out of your pockets, and that was to Trevor Francis when he presented him with an award. Stand up straight, get your shoulders back and get your hair cut. That was advice for John McGovern at Hartlepool's. I like my women to be feminine, not sliding into tackles and covered in mud. Brian on women's football. Some overflow genius who had a hero. As well as Harry Storer, the real Brian Clough was easy to talk to, but very much harder to really get to know, as he could be ferocious and kind-hearted, outrageous or a genius, a dragon or a pussycat. Charismatic, outspoken and often controversial, he's still considered one of the greatest managers of the English game. His teams were noted for playing good football and for their good sportsmanship, never arguing with referees. How we could do with that today? John McGovern said Brian's passion for the game never wavered or died. He took all the responsibility on his shoulders and left us to play the match, giving us self-confidence and great esteem. Martin O'Neill said he was England's version of Muhammad Ali, a more charismatic man you could not meet, and he was a truly brilliant manager. Pillar talk from the master manager. My wife said to me in bed, "God, your feet are so cold." And Brian replied, "You can call me Brian in bed, dear." The best thing he ever did was marrying Barbara. Barbara said he was very forthright, never saying anything about people he wouldn't say to their face. He was very witty, generous to a fault, and he absolutely loved children. He was watching some young lads having a kickabout, said hello to them and bought them all a bag of chips each. They never forgot that kind gesture. He was absolutely dedicated to football and heartbroken when he couldn't play anymore. But he and Peter went to Hartlepool to manage, thanks to Len Shackleton. Learned their trade at the bottom, which he believed was vital. Too many ex-players want to go straight in at the top without serving an apprenticeship. His motivation was forming a team that played good football, and people said he ruled by fear, but the reverse was true. He took the fear out of the game, and the players loved playing for him. A joke in our family is when I talk football, he would say, "Okay, Alf," a reference to Alf Ramsey, who he absolutely loved and admired. In hindsight, 30 or 40 years after he conquered Europe, it would take a team like Barnsley, Preston, Bolton or Doncaster to win the European Cup to equal what Brian and Peter did. When people ask if he could cope with the game today, of course he would, no doubt about it. In 2013, 9 years after Brian died, Barbara fell in a supermarket car park and banged her head. She was taken to hospital, checked out and released. 5 days later, she was rushed into hospital again and sadly died following a brain bleed. A truly remarkable woman. Goodbye, Brian. Football is not as exciting without you. The two most quotable people in football in my lifetime were Bill Shankly and Brian Clough. Often their quotes would be humorous, as this one is from Brian Clough. Whenever I felt a bit off colour, I'd go and sit next to John Robertson. Then I looked like Errol Flynn and I felt wonderful. I was lucky enough to manage some great players, but the greatest was a scruffy little Scotsman called John Robertson, who won me a few European Cups, you know. It was no coincidence that John Robertson's autobiography was called Supertramp, the title that described him perfectly. I'm not sure what sort of alcohol Brian is pouring from the bottle. Very strange and an unlikely action from Brian. They were having a bet to give up smoking and drinking, but they both cheated, as Robertson revealed in his book. Nottingham Forest were tenacious in the mould of their boss, Graham Souness. It's 18 years since Brian Clough died, and football is a different world now to the one when our team and his team went head to head. No quarter spared. Now we have directors of football, heads of scouting and recruitment committees. There's not a chance that Clough would have accepted any of them because he was a manager in the full meaning of the word, managing and controlling every aspect of the club, and he did all the talking. Forest were promoted as a second division's third place team in 1977, immediately won the first division title, and then lifted the European Cup twice, which is still the greatest achievement in British football. He drew a group of players together who were totally resolute, completely disciplined, and very hard to play against. Some were genuinely outstanding, and John Robertson was the most underrated of them all. People might be surprised when I say that Robertson is a player who completely fits my definition of world class. You could go and spend 150 to 200 million on any player you like, but none could deliver more than Robertson did in that Forest team over 40 years ago. It was war between us and them. They were dogged, they roughed teams up, playing a counter-attacking game, and our defeat against them over 2 legs in the European Cup first round when we were defending the title in September 1978 was particularly hard to stomach. Not a complete story without this goalkeeper. He was born in Barnsley in 1969, joined Forest youth team in 1987 and had a loan spell at Man United, but never played a game. He broke into the first team in 1990 and played in the 1991 FA Cup final against Spurs, saving a penalty. Played 393 games for Forest under managers including Brian Clough and Frank Clough. The only goalkeeper to have saved a Matt Letizia penalty, who incidentally scored 47 out of 48 spots kicked. And Gareth Southgate turned down his offer to coach England players on taking penalties. Unbelievable. Mark Crossley's stories, told with a passable impersonation of Clough, form the foundation of his after-dinner routine. I have a canvas of Cloughie on the wall at home. My wife said I'd never stop talking about him, so she went out and bought it. Mark Crossley's words. I made my debut against Liverpool, and 2 weeks later, after beating Newcastle United and then Coventry in the FA Cup, he told me to be at his house at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I turned up at 5 to 9 and Barbara made me a cup of tea, and when Clough came downstairs he said I was playing for his son Simon's team in Division 5 of the Derbyshire Sunday League. It was mad. The field was full of broken glass and dog feces. Archie Gemmell was the linesman and we won comfortably. Simon's team got fined £50 for playing a ringer, and guess who went to pay? But it was all calculated genius. He was making sure I didn't get too big for my boots. I love the man, and 30 years later, I still do. Sadly, Mark had many demons when he retired, and had turned to walking to help him, as he found retirement took away all the structure in his life. So now his routine revolves around his family, walking and his work doing after dinner speaking, all about Clough. Hardman Vinnie Jones. It was no match for Clough. Nottingham Forest were playing Wimbledon, the crazy gang, and the noise from their dressing room was driving Brian Clough crazy. So he sent Alan Hill, the chief scout, to ask if they could turn the music down. Hill knocked on Wimbledon's dressing door, and Vinnie Jones answered the door, so Alan asked if they would turn the volume down. Vinnie nodded his agreement. Back in the Forest dressing room, the music was louder, so Clough told Hill to go back and say, please, could they turn the ghetto blaster down? No problem. Alan Hill knocked on the door again and asked Vinnie to please turn the music down, as it was driving Mr. Clough crazy. Vinnie nodded his agreement again. Back in the Notts Forest dressing room, the noise was rattling the light fittings and the windows. Clough went down to the Wimbledon dressing room, knocked on the door, walked straight in, picked up the ghetto blaster and smashed it to pieces on the floor, saying, now play your bloody music, Wimbledon, before returning to his own quiet dressing room. in his good books or his bad books. I never get tired of researching Brian Clough or reading books about him. He served his apprenticeship at Hartlepool before starting to climb the management ladder, thanks to another North East legend, Len Shackleton. His players loved getting the thumbs up sign from the dugout, but they did not want to get a letter from him with a red tree on the envelope, as that told the player he was being fined. I doubt whether we'll ever see his like again, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about the fantastic Brian Clough.